Titan beloveds, Mudiwa to God. I told y'all I was gonna do it. As promised, I got a little something for you about the history of Mother's Day. Some gonna like it, some not. But I just want you to know that this is a factual analysis of a historical American tradition. It's not meant to ruffle any feathers. It's not meant to piss anybody off. It's not meant to upset anybody. It's just meant to be exactly what it is, a factual analysis of a American historical event. So with that in mind, let's get into it. Let me do this work real quick, real fast. See y'all in a minute. All right, off top, we go get into this. The Strange but True History of Mother's Day by yours truly, Mudiwa. We tend to think about Mother's Day and our own mortality. So we by that I mean we don't realize that Mother's Day hasn't always been. Mother's Day is basically a new concept. It's barely over 100 years old. And where did it come from? How did it start? Who kicked it off? And why? And that's what I'm here today. A lot of people don't know 3 of the 4 people responsible for Mother's Day weren't even mothers. 3 of the 4 people responsible for Mother's Day as we know it today aren't even mothers. And I want to talk to you about those 4 people today. And we'll get it started with this person right here. This is President Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was the man that actually signed into law Mother's Day being federally recognized. An interesting side note about Woodrow Wilson, if you notice this picture, if you see his wife standing there next to him, it looks as if she's pointing to something on the paper when in actuality she's holding the paper still because at the time this picture was taken, Woodrow Wilson has suffered a stroke and his whole left side of his body was paralyzed. So just an interesting side note about Woodrow Wilson being one of the few presidents that actually had a physical handicap while in office. And we'll go forward from here. Woodrow Wilson was the man that actually signed Proclamation 1268 in the year 1914, May of 1914 to be exact. And this is a copy of that proclamation. And what I'll do is I'm gonna leave maybe on my Facebook page, or I might download this whole slide presentation, and so you can see these sources yourself. This is the actual proclamation that declared the second Sunday of May as being a nationally recognized holiday. Now, this is all fine and dandy. This was done in 1914 again. This is all fine and dandy, but then you want to know who was the spark that motivated President Wilson to make Mother's Day a national holiday. This is something that we got to examine. Like, he didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, let's make a day for mothers. Someone had to give him an inkling. It doesn't work that way on the executive level. He doesn't just wake up and decide to make a holiday. There's certain things that have to be done, and one of the things that have to be done in order for the president to pass law, there has to be resolutions, there has to be bills, there has to be votes, there has to be agreements, and all of these things have to be done in a specifically designed manner. So, who was the person that sparked Woodrow Wilson into signing Proclamation 1268? And that would be this guy right here, arguably the father of Mother's Day, J. Thomas Heflin. Heflin was a well respected, well loved, well revered 26-year long career politician from Alabama. This man had friends in very high places, and he's the man that wrote the resolution that became the legislation in order for Woodrow Wilson to sign. J. Thomas Heflin, well respected man. The one strange, not even strange thing about J. Thomas Heflin, but the one kind of way out thing about J. Thomas Heflin, even though you would think that, hey man, this man created Mother's Day, he's got to be an awesome guy. He had a little, he had a couple skeletons in his closet, and his main skeleton in his closet, he was a stomp down, unapologetic white supremacist to the core. Verifiable, fact checkable. He was not with any parts of integration. He was not with any parts of intermarrying. He was one of those guys. When you say Southern cracker, you talking about that dude. This is the dude. When you say Southern cracker, that's who you talking about. He was all of the above. He's almost single handedly responsible for writing the legislation that barred black people from voting in Alabama. Yeah, him, this guy right here. So not only was he not only did he write that legislation about barring black people from voting in Alabama, he was also let me go a little further right now. Let me show you in his own words what he wrote concerning Mother's Day. May 11th, 1913. On this date, the members of the House of Representatives wore white carnations to honor American mothers in the Capitol's first observance of Mother's Day. Representative James Heflin of Alabama introduced House Resolution 103 on May 10th, requesting President Woodrow Wilson, members of the Cabinet, the U.S. Senate, and House of Representatives, and other federal officials to don white carnations or some other white flower to honor mothers for being the greatest source of our country's strength. Now, what Heflin was doing with Resolution 103, he was venerating the white woman. Plain and simple. There was no all inclusive. There was no get along philosophy about this. The inception or the creation that was in his head was to venerate the white woman. Hence, wear a white carnation or any other white flower. Is that a coincidence? I highly doubt it. A little more history on the man Heflin. Let's go a little forward here. He was instrumental in Alabama on something that was called convict leasing. If you're not familiar with what convict leasing is, it was a practice that was done in Alabama and other southern states where private businesses could actually lease human beings to do work at their private companies from the state for as little as $9 a month. So what, let me say that again, for as little as $9 a month, private companies could rent labor from prisoners to do work in private industries. This was basically slavery by another name. And instrumental to this was Heflin and other members of Alabama, along with other members of politics all throughout the South. This wasn't just a random incident, this was normal practice. What happened was this: post Civil War, you have all these free black men running around in the South. Laws were enacted to criminalize uh, vagrancy. And once you criminalize vagrancy, once you committed that act to, basically, vagrancy means just hanging out and not having a job. So once you've done that so many times, now we can create a felony on you. Now what we can do is we can arrest you and imprison you. And now once you've been arrested and imprisoned, you're put right back into the system of basic slavery. Now just remember, the amendment to the Constitution says that slavery was abolished except for in the case of what? Punishment for a crime. So they were thinking, they were had advanced thinking when it came to these things. And this book right here was written, "Slavery by Another Name." Interesting piece about the situations that went on post Civil War up into World War II, and how laws and legislation was passed in order to criminalize basic black behavior in order to, because the South was losing, their infrastructure was tore up because of the war, their manufacturing was destroyed because of the war, so they needed to find some kind of way to do what they do best. And what's that? Create cheap labor. So laws were enacted all across the South, and Heflin was one of those people that was instrumental in the creation and the passage of these laws that criminalized the smallest of things that would get black men thrown in prison in order to create this new form of slave labor. That's just an interesting side note about Heflin, your so-called father of Mother's Day. Now, also, Heflin was anti-integration to the full.